Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the November 20th Finance Committee meeting. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Ta-da. Chair comments. I have three quick comments to make. Number one, although it's not on the agenda, I've asked Marianne and Mike Petrecka to work together to work with Dale so that at the end of, after the audit is done, we're prepared to do to roll into the controls review that we've agreed to and have now provided funding for in the budget. So that's coming attraction. Secondly, we have received a number of interested parties for new members to the Finance Committee. I have reviewed all of the resumes and I've spoken to many of the candidates, and I'm pleased to say that we have a number of individuals who appear to be highly qualified. And number three, we do have a meeting on the schedule for December 18th. I don't have anything in particular in mind for that meeting, but I would ask the members of the committee to keep it on your calendar. I'm not interested in interrupting family holiday time, but just keep it on your calendar in case there is something that is of a priority nature to be discussed. And finally, but most importantly, as always, I'd like to thank Dale and his staff for the work they do. It's a lot of work, it's quality work, and they get to put up with me and others. So I really appreciate what they do. Okay, next on the agenda is the minutes from two meetings, October 16th and October 28th. I've reviewed those. I think Dale has as well. I don't have any amendments or modifications to suggest. So are there any comments relative to either of those minutes? Okay, hearing none, can I have a motion to approve both minutes, please?
I move that we approve both sets of minutes.
I'm sorry?
I said I move
Oh.
that we approve both sets of minutes.
Thank you.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I
Any opposed? Okay, the minutes have been approved. Okay, so there are two major categories on the agenda. The first one is to review the language, the amendment language for the FCM Financial Control Manual that has to do with the board designated initiative designated fund that we have discussed with the board and that the board has approved, subject to an appropriate amendment to the FCM, which the language of which we're going to review today, and subject to the endorsement of the Finance Committee, will then go to the board in December for approval, and then the board designated initiative fund in the umbrella operating fund will go live. The second part is the discussion around a number of different topics, but let's deal with the FCM amendment language first. And I would just highlight that Dale and Shannon have reviewed this language. So questions or comments or suggestions relative to that language. I did send a note sort of outlining the logic of the language change, but that notwithstanding. John, I think you had some questions. Do you want to raise those?
Well, everybody, I think, saw my email, so if others don't have any issues, then I don't see any need to. Talk about it.
So let me just, but you did raise one point that I think is notable, and let me just address that. So I think your observation was correct, that initially we sort of contemplated this as a one-time transfer, if you will, i.e., after working with Dale, we determined that the asset depreciation account was more than adequately funded, so there's $1 million available for this new initiative fund. But thinking about it, if it's a good idea, maybe it's a good idea, long term. So the way the language is represented in the FCM material is that during a budget cycle, if the board chooses to restock that fund after it's been used, or some or all of it has been used, the board can do that. I see no reason, and that would be in the budget process, reviewed by this finance committee, available and visible to the public, and approved as part of the formal budget capital B. So it provides the board a little more flexibility in terms of providing funding for initiatives that are priority, but aren't necessarily pinned down either in terms of timing or the specific dollar amount. So I think it did start out as sort of like a one-time opportunity. The document does reflect the fact that the board has the discretion of reloading that account if they choose to do that. So I think it's, and again, there would be full transparency and would have to be formally done.
Hey, Paul, I had a quick question. So like in the verbiage there, it states that the finance committee would review this, but what is like the real meat there? Is there like the board comes and says, we need $1 million for a special project, which we think is relevant to the members. Are we just looking at the project like and just saying great? Or can the finance committee say this isn't right?
Yeah, so Brandon, it's a great question. I think the short answer to your question is yes. So let's say, so I can think of 3 things off the top of my head that might qualify for this. There might be some amenities that present themselves. There might be something relative to the front gate. There might be something to a initiation of an ARB. Those are the kinds of things that might come to pass. And so because those specific projects would not have been included in the budget, they should be reviewed here because they would be material, are the basis of the cost, how the project is going to be managed, just the way we would have reviewed the pending amenity for the sandcastle. So it would be a regular review of an expenditure plan that would be material and not explicitly in the budget.
So I had the same thought, I think, as Brian, that once reviewed seems to be a limitation on the board. In other words, for me, the perception is that it may limit the board on being able to approve something, whereas I get completely the finance committee should review those types of things and provide a recommendation. But it seems like this language.
Well, there is no limit on the board because we get all our power from the board.
Exactly. That's my
Yeah,
point.
we don't have a check.
Yeah.
That's
There's not a
exactly my
check.
point, is that it seems like it should be more of the finance committee can recommend or shall recommend, or but
That
the
seems
board
like
has
what Brandon's
autonomy with
asking.
regard to anything.
Okay, so
He's
a
asking, what are
different.
we actually doing?
So are you, so is the idea that we need a different action verb like review as opposed to concur, or what, or do you think it shouldn't come here at all?
Well, I think it could be as simple as, once approved by the board, such an issue is made funded from the, and then the board, can utilize the services of the finance committee at any time they choose. Mary Ann?
I think the language is fine as it is. It says once reviewed by the finance committee and approved by the board. It doesn't say that the board's approval is contingent on whether the finance committee approves it. It's contingent on whether the finance committee reviews it.
Right. Well, is that a limitation that we're comfortable with?
It would,
I
and
think
Mary
it's
Ann, that was the intent.
Yeah.
It wasn't to be a blocking mechanism,
Mhm.
but it was to say, okay, there's a proposal to spend $750,000. Has the finance committee looked at it? And if the answer is yes, you know, has the finance committee raised any questions about this? Like, there's no way we're gonna be able to get this done for 700, who knows? It's just, it's a precedent
Yep.
that will be intended to be helpful for the board, that the finance committee didn't see any showstoppers. That was the intent.
Can you flip the language and have board approval first and then finance committee review?
Well, it seems to me if I'm a board member, I could do that, but then the finance committee reviews it and says, you know, this doesn't look right, and then it has to go back to the board. So I guess my preference would be, I don't think this would be a major stress or strain. It's the association staff is going to do their work in terms of how to spend the $750,000, et cetera. Review by the finance committee goes to the.
So I concur with everything about the finance committee should review these types of things because they're consultants to the board, right? And provide expertise. What about in the first, I guess it's little I, such initiatives will be analyzed and formally recommended by the COO and finance committee or something to that effect? I guess my only, and I think we're fine either way, but I guess my thought is there ever going to be an instance where the board, for whatever reason, may need to act on a particular item? And if the finance committee hasn't reviewed it, that becomes a limiting factor or a complicating factor.
Yeah, so fair question. Hypothetically, that could certainly happen, but I would hope it wouldn't happen.
I agree.
I would hope that if we want to spend, you know, if in, you know, July of next year, we want to spend $1 million, you know, on a technology redo for the front gate.
I'll go multi-sector in the call.
You know, there would be an opportunity for the finance committee to review.
Is there a way to provide a limit, maybe, like anything over, I don't know, $250,000, $500,000 expense? Because I could see Dale's scenario of the board saying, look, we want to move forward in this, we need 50,000 for E&D, or we need 100,000 for consultant or whatever, and they want to pull that money from $1 million. But I can also see the board saying, okay, now we have $1 million project, or we have a $2.5 million project. We need the finance committee to weigh in, and I liked your wording earlier on an expenditure plan. Like, right, because that's your expertise. How are we gonna fund this? If it's $500,000, we're funding it from that. If it's $2.5 million, whoops, now where are we getting the money? So I like.
Okay, well, I personally would be happy with that, Shannon. I think that's a nice way to parse this. So.
We're trying to replicate some transparency process in this structure so that initiatives that did not go through the regular budget
Right.
have a transparency process. So why don't we just mimic the transparency process we have for the budget, which is the the finance committee reviews it and then sends it, and then the board, approves it, and that just happens in an accelerator. I mean, the concern that I think people would have about this is that it not become
A slush fund. Right.
That, and the reason why I don't like the limit is because because I think members expect that even if the expense is $40,000, that it would still go through some sort of transparency process, and it doesn't become like something that, Paul just decided he wants to do something that, or the board just decided that, and they don't want to be visible. And so we're trying to protect this visibility through this process. So I think I'm saying what you did. So just make it so the finance, so that it looks a little bit like what we do for the budget, which is the finance committee sort of recommends it, and then the board says, yeah, that's what we asked you to look at. Or
Maybe the finance committee
I was on the front end.
reference goes in little I, like we talked about.
Yeah,
And then
exactly. And-
because that's kind of what the intent is, I think, in that it's the COO and the finance committee that has considered this and are then moving it forward together to the board.
And it's always going to be at the board's request, right? So we're going to be looking at something that we're just going to be
Okay.
doing the transparency process because the
Yep.
board said, I want to spend something on this. We just couldn't do that. People can comment. We have a meeting, and then you achieve that transparency process.
Okay, so Dale,
John, that
what,
gets at what you were talking about. Okay.
so Dale, what would you suggest to add and delete? Such initiatives will be reviewed by the finance
Well, it could
committee.
be, such issues will be analyzed and formally presented by the COO and the finance committee to the board in conjunction with the finance
With a
committee,
recommendation from the finance.
with the recommendation from the finance committee to the board.
Works for me.
And then the next one just becomes, once approved by the board, such initiatives.
I'm good with that.
I'm good with that. Okay, everybody comfortable with that? Okay, so, any other issues relative to the draft amendment to the FCM?
Did you want to touch on this one that I have up on page 16?
16? Okay, so, right, so 16 is chapter 10, fixed assets. The antecedent bullet point says only asset replacement may be funded with asset replacement dollars. The full cost of replacement will be funded. We've added a bullet that says, however, the board may, at its discretion, determine and formally approve periodic transfer of deemed surplus funds from the asset replacement account to a separate designated fund for board-approved initiatives. So that is the feature that says, well, there could be additional funding if the board determines that there is a deemed surplus from the asset replacement account in the future.
So how often would that happen? When we just had it happen, right? That's where the $1 million came from. So like, where would that come from, Dave?
Maybe never.
Like, I could see where if some of these assets disappear for some reason, then there's money set aside for those assets. If we sold the assets, I don't know how the assets would ever kind of disappear. So like, I don't know what prompted this $1 million. I can't remember what we talked about.
Well, one over 20 years
Okay.
of attributing reserve fund, a proportionate share of reserve fund earnings to this account, which we stopped at the beginning of this year with an adjustment to the FCM. So now only a proportionate share of the designated cash is attributed to this fund. So it'll be a much lesser number. We also limited the amount of funding from this fund for replacement assets to their accumulated depreciation or their cost, the original cost. Now, with the adjustment of the FCM at the beginning of the year, we are replacing assets at the value of the replacement. So that is a big difference, because a truck that costs 20,000 that now costs 50,000.
Right.
That's
You only have 20
right.
people.
So that was accumulation over years, and that's why we accumulated that much. Now, I could see there's sometimes where, let's say, and this isn't that often, but there may be some assets that just they're no longer useful, and we're not replacing them. Well, at that point, we do an annual audit or inventory of our assets, and if there's assets that exist like that, that funding that we originally put into this fund because of those assets then gets funded back to the operating fund. So that will decrease.
That's kind of my point, is you do an annual audit to do this calculation, if you will. So I don't understand why we wouldn't just, any activity associated with this wouldn't also just be part of the annual budget process when you're doing, I assume you're doing that analysis in advance of the budget process.
So we wouldn't adjust this asset replacement dollars for the actual like accumulated depreciation and inventory of assets and all that, because in my mind, because the whole idea of attributing earnings is to combat the inflation. So we want this to grow. It's just a matter of, in, let's say, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, if it outpaces inflation, then maybe there's some surplus. Now,
and to me, all I'm arguing is, why not just make that determination during the budget process?
sure.
Versus what it says in here, which is periodically, which would imply that anytime during the year, if somebody decided that the.
No. Formally approve. The board may at its discretion
Periodic.
determine
It
and
doesn't say
formally approve periodic transfers.
Right, it's not part of the budget process.
It is not part of the budget process, but there is a control because it does this. So there are two pieces of future funding. One is this, where, okay, maybe it's a low percentage, I don't really know. But this says, okay, if there's a surplus in the future, if a deemed surplus in the future, if Dale says, you know, these are surplus funds, okay, then the board can approve a subsequent funding from this particular account. But in the preceding document that amendment, that language we referred to, it says little 4, during any regular budget cycle, the COO may recommend and the board may approve additional funding from operating fund resources. So there's an omnibus ability for management and the board to supplement this initiatives fund. This is kind of a subset of that has to do with, if there were to be a surplus, that could be a source of funds too. That's all.
So I would, and this is just for conversation, I don't have necessarily a firm belief on this, but we might want to talk about removing the deemed surplus, because at some point the board may decide there's another priority that is greater than this one.
Okay.
And who's to determine what is a surplus?
Here's a suggestion.
If we're enduring earnings, okay,
Here's a suggestion. Why don't we just take this out?
exactly.
Yeah, okay.
So it
That's
becomes periodic transfer.
That's a good outcome.
Of funds.
I'm good.
It's
I'm
part of the
actually-
normal accounting process. You review the balance sheet. You've deemed
Yeah.
it to be surplus. You've justified it by showing us the 5-year history. So.
All right.
It's just
Yeah.
part of the normal year-end.
Which is exactly what
process.
happened this year.
Okay, any other
So Paul,
questions?
just to
relative-
clarify, you're just taking that whole.
Just,
bullet
I'm
out.
taking the amendment on page 16,
That-
bullet
yeah,
point,
bullet.
however the
Okay,
board
that's
may,
fine.
I'm just taking that.
Just
I'm
wanted to
deleting
understand.
that addition.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions or comments? All right, hearing none, I would like to make a motion. Can I make a motion? I think
Can-
so.
Can I make one other comment?
Yes, of course.
Just so you know, just for perspective, this is not a separate fund, right? And it's not an account. This is just a designated cash. So the cash is actually in our operating account. I am just tracking these amounts off ledger, so to speak, and reporting on them on a regular basis.
So when you give us that list of designated funds, which is what, $5 million somewhere in there?
Sure.
This will be broken out in that,
Yeah, but it's not,
in account.
And it doesn't have a target, it'll get bent down until theoretically it's zero unless replenished by the.
well, you're talking about what, the asset replacement dollars?
No, the BDIF.
Designated funds.
Well, the designated funds will stay there, like, it includes the main storm, it includes the.
No,
P-gate.
but just this one.
There'll be a line item,
Yes.
there'll be a new line item.
Oh, the
For the
board
board
initiatives,
Yeah.
yes,
The
exactly,
board
unless it gets
it'll be $1
replenished.
million and then it'll go down to zero
Yep.
if we never add anything and we just spend it.
And more further clarification, the designated cash amount is a separate cash account, not in the general ledger, but separate cash
It's just
account
all funds.
that's
It's the $5 million.
invested according to an IPS.
And to further that point, there is the very last amendment, which is on page 21, under chapter 15, investments. It talks about it talks about designated cash
Yes,
as a separate category for investment management purposes.
correct.
That's the reason that I included that board designated initiative. So Dale, if you want to tweak the terminology that I used in this draft to reflect what you just said in terms of not a fund, not an account, et cetera, please do that. I don't want to create confusion.
Well,
In terms of the taxonomy of our.
quite frankly, I think we could solve that. I don't know how it is in here, but by making, if the fund is a big F, we could reduce that to a small f, because fund in accounting, right? So that may solve that problem, as long as we understand as a group,
The intent.
yeah, and how this is structured.
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
So with the changes that we have agreed to page 8 proposed language and to page 16 that we have changed, I would propose that we adopt these modifications to the financial control manual and recommend that the board approve them. Do I have a second?
Yeah, second.
Second.
Any additional discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
I,
Aye. Aye.
Any opposition? Thank you. Thank you, Dale. Okay, so part 2 of the meeting. So these are topics that we are not going to resolve today, probably, but I think are important for us to think about. So the first one that I've listed here is financial analysis for amenity expenditures. There are 2 parts to this. Part 1, and both are in collaboration, obviously with staff, but also in collaboration with the amenities committee. Part 1 is when we collectively propose a new amenity or an add-on to an amenity, what is the financial analysis that the association deems appropriate for that expenditure? Obviously, how much is it going to cost? What's going to be the impact on insurance? What are the maintenance costs? what is the impact on the MR&R funding in the future? So there are a number of things that would be sort of automatic. I am not suggesting that we're not doing all of that stuff today, but I think it might be helpful to codify or agree what the components of that pre-investment in new amenity would include. Now, there are amenities. I think there are two kinds of amenities. Just my perspective. One amenity is, let's say, the sandcastle. And the sandcastle is a facility that is available to every member. And it's a broad use, multi-purpose asset. The other kind would be analogous to the kayak dock, which is going to cater, it's available to everybody, sort of, but it's a very narrow use. And so in thinking about those two, if those categories are relevant, then the second part of this topic is, okay, how do we finance amenities? And so the part A is, what is the financial analysis that we should articulate for any amenity spend, whether it's broad or narrow scope? And the second is, what are the financing options? And what do our documents say about those financing options? So for example, special assessment, okay? Are there any limitations on that? I'm not really sure, but there may be. Could we borrow money? I think we could. What are the limitations associated with borrowing money? Could we borrow money from the MR&R reserve? People have from time to time suggested that as a methodology. Should we charge user fees? So I think as an idea, as a thought, I'm inclined to believe that there could be some effort when it comes to both financial analysis of and funding for amenities that would be helpful to the association and to the community. So that's discussion item number one. If people have contrary views, that's fine. If they have other views or observations, I would welcome them.
Three other aspects. One is maintenance, which I assume we really wouldn't be talking about. Just ongoing maintenance would be part of the operating budget. There might be enhancement or renovation, which may be, so there could be some concept of materiality as well, right? And then the third would be something new. So in addition to broadly utilized versus narrowly utilized, to me, there's also this question of, well, what is it that we're doing, and does that fall under different requirements? For example, maintenance to me would just be part of the normal operating budget. You know what you're going to do there, et cetera. Renovation would be, okay, we're going to take the sandcastle and add, a wing, or something like that, or it's a material renovation. And then the third is something brand new like kayak storage. To me, there's an aspect of this which is, what is it we're trying to do? And I don't think maintenance, maintenance is maintenance. I don't think that should really come under this burden per se. I think if it's renovation over a certain amount that wouldn't be part of the normal operating activity, then maybe that's something that should be subject to this, and then certainly something new. And I think, I think it's great that we're talking about this because, everybody, most of I have an issue last year with the kayak storage, and I just didn't feel like the amenities committee had done any deep financial analysis of what the alternatives were to building 90 kayak storage bays when there are other options around that I've provided to certain members of the board, et cetera. So I do think having finance committee engagement in looking at, or how the staff thinks about this is important. I don't think what you're saying here is the finance committee, again, has any check or veto right over what the board wants to do. It's more about how to fund it or to think.
How to
through
analyze it.
How to analyze it, because if the amenities committee says they want something with 20 bells and whistles, and nobody said, well, we can do the same thing cheaper, I think it's important that gets reviewed. And so I do think this is a valuable discussion, and, we don't want to over engineer it, but, maybe it's conceptually something where you set a certain threshold and say if it's over a certain amount, it needs to be subjected to certain things. And I think to your point, like with kayak storage, I know they've done some analysis, or maybe you all done a form that says, this will be paid back in 6 years if we charge a user fee. That type of analysis for narrow use,
Right.
I think is important, and user fees where it's not like broadly able to be utilized by the broader membership. Then I think thinking about user fees for something like that's important, so that you could kind of show that it will pay for itself, and that there isn't some concept of broader members subsidizing, a very narrow need within the community.
So, John, I agree with everything you said. I do want to distinguish, and I agree with you, again, I agree with everything you said. In particular, that this would not be a maintenance spend.
Right.
Maintenance would be in the regular operating budget. But what I am suggesting, and I'll give you a hypothetical example. Let's say we made a significant investment in an operating system for front gate security, whatever, and we have to spend $500,000. Okay, great. Well, the financial analysis of that expenditure should also include $50,000 licensing fee that we have to pay every recurring expense. Or if we make an amenity, if we create an amenity that has a high maintenance requirement, like a pool, okay, that would have an analytical input that might be different than some other kind of amenity. So I just think, and again, I think you framed it correctly. It ought to be a codification, because I'm not suggesting that this isn't done, but there ought to be a codification and an agreement on the kind of analysis that is done for different kinds of amenity spends, and then an appropriate analysis of our covenants, so that we know, okay, we have A to E, and here are the conditions associated with options A through E in terms of financing something. And the reason why this is on my mind is because, okay, the board has approved engineering design for a significant amenity enhancement at the Sandcastle, and I think it's going to be great. And we're going to be able to handle it because it's going to be $1 million or less without financing per se. But that's not always going to be the case. And, if we have an opportunity to buy the real estate office, who knows? But, something that's measured in the millions, I don't want us to be totally unprepared in terms of, okay, here are options. So, John, were you volunteering to take this on?
I'm happy to. I'm just curious. I mean, again, I don't think we want to, I wouldn't be more thinking around over engineering it. Like the staff, like for example, okay, it's hard to, I mean, the other way you could go is just say any expenditure for, and when you talk about an operating system, I don't think of that as an amenity.
But yeah,
But
fair,
yeah,
fair.
but, you know, if it's
Swimming pool.
purely, truly, quote, amenities, i.e. things that are coming out of the amenities committee or the board that are defined as amenities, then to me, it could be you present it to the finance committee and ask the finance committee what analysis they think should be done versus trying to anticipate every possible scenario and put that down, try to get that down in writing. I mean, that makes it really complicated for staff. To me, it's cost benefit, really. It just comes down to, you know, maybe, okay, you want to spend $500,000 or let's make this example that what we're talking about with Sandcastle. We're going to spend $800,000 to put an addition on Sandcastle. Okay, then come to the finance committee and get feedback around what type of analysis the finance committee would want to see versus trying to say, well, if it's 250,000, do this. If it's 800,000, do that. I mean, you could just kind of say, you present it to the finance committee for feedback as to what analysis should be done.
So that analysis is gonna happen, I mean, regardless,
Yeah, I
right?
know, you're
So
gonna
it's just
do
a
it.
matter of
Codifying it, there goes.
collaborating with the finance committee to say, what key points or data points would you like to see in this analysis?
Right.
And
So
then
if
we
take
just
the
go
facility
through, just
for
like we
Like a
do with the
checklist.
budget or anything
Right.
else, we
Right.
prepare something and bring it to you and go,
Right.
boom, 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 check, and we're done.
Yeah.
The amenities committee won't do that per se, because they're not the financial experts.
Right.
They don't know the budget.
Right.
Why don't we
Right.
just make large amenities have to go through a joint process with the finance committee and the amenity committee? Do you guys approve things at the board that don't have for an amenity that don't have a financial analysis associated with it? No, right? Or do you?
That hasn't happened since I've been here.
How, I guess the question is
We don't
almost like,
do
how
a
could you?
budget. Yeah.
Well, we haven't had one recently.
So
But
Well,
let me give you a real.
Sandcastle that's one, that's 800 grand's a bunch of money.
No, I know, but we've
They haven't
only
approved
approved the
budget yet.
engineering and design dollars. Okay. So here's an example of something that we might want to articulate in terms of our analytical process. And John, by the way, I agree with you in terms of the completeness of the analysis coming out of the amenities committee. For example, okay, we're going to build this new kayak storage capacity, but there was nothing in there about the load that would be incremental to the MR&R. Well, shouldn't that be part of the analysis? I personally think it should be, but
But that's why I think if we have it set up to where that type of thing goes to the finance committee, then we can weigh in and say that should be part of it.
Okay. We could do it all ad hoc, yes. My suggestion, and again, it's suggestion for discussion, I don't have an answer. My suggestion is that it may be helpful to codify, small c, the process for amenity expansion that is, to Shannon's point, more than 100,000 or pick a number. That these are the kinds of things that we would expect to collaborate with the amenities committee on in crafting a recommendation.
So would that be
I-
part of the FCM, you think?
Mary Ann.
Sorry.
I agree with everything that you've talked about. It seems to me that you could do it as a kind of checklist, that in some cases it's going to be applicable, in other cases it's not going to be. And I think you could think about a checklist of things that might be considered for evaluating different amenities. And I'd be interested in working with John on
I mean, it
this.
could be, we can account for everything in the FCM, right? I mean, we could just make that 100 pages long, but maybe
That's
this is
why
an
I don't
SO.
like, that's
maybe
why
this
I
is-
don't like that idea, because I think you're going to be planning for a lot of
Exactly.
things.
Maybe this is
you
an
don't
SOP and that we just refer to when this comes up. That's
Yeah.
standard operating procedure.
Okay, so
These are the things to consider.
my
I like your check.
suggestion is
exactly.
that we happily and with appreciation accept the offer of John and Mary Ann to think about this and come back to us with some ideas.
Yep.
Okay, next. I know this next item is a bugaboo. And I know that I drive staff members crazy on this, but it is something that bothers me. There seems to be a contradiction. To me, there seems to be a contradiction between the association's fundamental purpose for investing MR&R dollars. On the one hand, we say, look, it's a hedging device. We have sort of this user fee concept as the useful life of our infrastructure is deteriorating. We want to charge members sort of the equivalent of a fee so that when it comes time to replace the observation tower, there's money there. Okay. But we need a hedge because we know the price in the future is going to be higher than the price today. So we need a hedge. And so we want to invest the money to stay ahead of the construction inflation, the estimated construction inflation index. Makes sense to me. But then the FCM says, okay, we have a target equity of 40% or 45%, I forget what it is. And so I'm thinking, and this is why I'm raising it with you openly to help me with this, put me out of my misery. Then we say, okay, equity 40%, fixed income 60%. Well, okay, do I need to subject the members to equity volatility and downside risk in order to hedge construction inflation? I don't think we do. And that's why I have this cramp, because I think there's a contradiction here. So I wanted to share it with my colleagues here and get your thoughts, including staff, obviously. That's it. That's the second one.
I think that like the finance committee has reviewed what asset allocation is appropriate for our structure and the Kika entity, and unanimously moved to set this type of equity and fixed income structure. And I think in part it's a function of what we're trying to match against. When we have like operating cash flows that are short term, it's sensible to have, treasuries against that. There's no reason to have anything more risky, and that's pretty standard. But given the long life of these assets and the inflation target that were set, I would say, historically, a more diversified allocation is appropriate. So this is something the finance committee debated, we approved, and then the board approved this allocation in 2024, I agree. And I was at that board meeting. I don't believe there was any no's to this proposition.
There was, Brand.
There was a no, or there was an abstain?
No, there was a no.
Who was the no?
You.
That was you? Okay. Okay, I didn't recall. But so I think it's been approved by the board in 24, is unanimously approved by the finance committee. I guess I understand your reservation on the equity risk, but I think Morgan Stanley has done a good job of this. If you look at historically performance, fixed income is not necessarily a safe place either. And in a rising rate environment, fixed income performs extremely poorly. And we've seen that over the last few years, ag performance, US aggregate performance, or US investment grade performance of corporate debt is very poor in certain periods, especially when rates are rising. Your absolute returns are negative. So I would just state that these are long-lived assets. In many ways, I've always considered this like a pension liability or some type of long-term liability. I don't believe that we can achieve the matching that liability risk with just fixed income. And I really think, like, if we look at the historical performance, fixed income can well underperform equities. It is not a safe place to be. But at the same time, I think this is a liability. As a member, I'm, paying an amenity. I'm paying these fees, assessments, and I want to make sure that, if I have my property for 10 years, that any liabilities are met as a result of paying these assessments. And like you've always stated, you think that the budget should be 100% funded because otherwise, we're hurting future owners at our advantage. And I think this is the same case. If we don't act to set an allocation that would meet the future liabilities, we're effectively hurting future owners at our benefit. So it's really kind of the same argument. Like, we're doing this because we're matching long-term liabilities. So
Any other comments?
One, I guess, observation I have too is that there's a range for equities, right? So there's the ability to adjust up or down at this point away from that target based on whatever circumstances arise. So it doesn't have to be at 40%. It could be at 25%.
Yep.
To account for any anticipated risk.
And Dale, that's a essential observation, and it's correct. I would just respond to your comment and to Brand's comments as follows. I don't know what the expectation of our members is. But I am hung up on this concept of we invest as a hedge. Now, if Morgan Stanley can tell me, or tell you, Brand, but even better, that I am not saying we should not have equity. I'm not, because I'm not smart enough to say that. And I certainly agree that fixed income has real risk. It has credit risk and it has market risk. It has real risk. But what I'm saying is, if we ask Morgan Stanley to answer the question, what is the optimum mix of fixed income and equity to provide the members with a, 90% probability over time of meeting or exceeding the construction inflation index? Would they say 40% equity?
I think they did some analysis on that. Didn't we see that in the last?
I think they have.
I think they actually
said
have
Yeah.
said that.
But I think that,
Have they?
I mean, yeah,
I think so, yeah.
I think I saw something like that in the last
We
quarterly
did
thing.
the pie charts.
Yeah.
Yeah, they said, look, with this equity allocation and based on through the cycle returns, that, again, this is not a CPI index that we found. We found this construction index, and so it is not. It's not like like you couldn't invest in tips and hit this, right? So
Right.
you're going to have to take some because there is more volatility. This index seems to run hotter than the regular sort of CPI index, right? And so I think you have to take some equity risk. And honestly, I don't want to just say the exact same things that Brand just said, but if that is exactly what I would respond to, which is the duration of the liabilities you can switch out your equity risk as you approach, as you get, within a couple of years of, a big liability, you can draw down your equity risk if you're afraid of that volatility. But, this is how pension funds run themselves. People with long dated, liability profiles run themselves in this way. And I think that's why Morgan Stanley is comfortable with us doing that. And I think that's probably why brands comfortable. And this is how, and I would, so when I came in, I did not participate in the cycle of a review that you guys talked about before, but I think exactly what Brand said is how I would respond. So I don't have anything else to say other than that.
Okay, any other thoughts?
I would agree with what Brand said quite eloquently. I think any advisor would say, you've got to have some equity to offset inflation. Whether or not we look at, we are going to have at some stage a hit to the market, but history shows you recover. Whether or not we want to look at collars or anything like that, that's an option to protect against downside. But I'd say we're fine as we are, to be honest with you. I'm no real expert, but I agree with Brad, what others have said.
Would Morgan Stanley, do they manage funds for other community associations, or is there any way to get a sense of benchmarking what other large community associations, how their investment strategy, what their investment strategies are? I mean, I'm not sure. I agree with everything that's been said, but it'd be maybe helpful or give some sense of comfort that, there are other large community associations with, with similar investment strategies. Maybe
I don't know the answer to that.
Well, so
We've asked.
twofold,
We've
I think.
asked them to do that.
Part
What's
of it is Morgan Stanley,
Yeah.
because this is their institutional arm, but part of it too, I think, is Shannon's membership to the what do you call it? Community associations. That could probably be a more effective route because it's apples to apples more so.
Mary Ann, do you have thoughts on
I
this?
don't have a different opinion.
You don't have a different opinion?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, look I guess what I would like to, I appreciate the input. I do. Because I don't, again, I don't mean to burden the committee with my discomforts. I'd like to have two follow-ups. Number one, Shannon, if you could suss out what large, quote unquote, comparable associations, what their investment strategy is vis-a-vis an MR&R equivalent, if there are those things, I think that would be useful input. I think that would be very interesting to know. And the second thing that I'd like to explore, and maybe Dale, you could help me with this. It could be true. It could be true, but I don't know that Morgan Stanley has said, this is the optimum risk return investment allocation for your objective to stay ahead of construction inflation. Maybe they have said that.
I think they actually have.
They execute our.
They actually have said that.
policy. That's.
They actually have
Well,
said
not only
that.
that, but
So
No,
they're
their
not
job is to earn
executing-
fees.
No,
oh, come on.
no, they're,
No,
I mean,
come on.
in the real world, maybe, but their job is to execute our investment policy. Otherwise, why did we put it
They're-
together?
Yes.
Right? So
Yes.
we put it together. As a fiduciary, their job is to execute that investment policy.
And their
So-
fees are set.
And
So,
if we think they're doing that, we should get somebody else to do
yeah,
it.
and they've actually increased their rebalancing and all that they do on a periodic basis. They've increased their equity allocation to meet the inflation metric. Whether it was going from 38 to 40 or 40 to 42 and then back. So they adjust along the way.
Okay, so look fine. Dale, do me a favor and provide me some therapy so that I can understand. But I understand, yes, they are following our investment. We've provided them with the investment policy, and they are following it. But I would appreciate some help with the concept that they have said, okay, you've provided this broadband. We think this is the optimal mix. Currently, we think this is the optimal mix. If that is what they said, I will not bother you anymore.
The one thing I would bring up here is that we do have that language, so Dale can share it for sure, because we worked really closely with actually crafting the IPS with them and what was reasonable given the context of our liabilities. But the one thing I would definitely be mindful of in the future is that what Dale said is really important. They do have a range of allocation that they're able to go to. And what I would be most mindful of is they are actually taking action given changes in the market, and they are using that range rather than, we go through various market cycles over the next 2-3 years, and they're always just like 40-60 equity fixed income. Like for me, that would be very, very disconcerting. So, as long as they're using their range, then that's great. And that's really what we're paying them for. And a portion of what we're paying them for is for them to use their discretion at that range. They should be using it.
I have no hesitation
But
to
that's like in
reiterate.
the future, I would just say.
Yep, I have no hesitation to reiterate that concept with them, and they'll be on board.
Good point.
They've been great to interact with.
Okay, so the third, thank you very much. Very helpful. Third bullet point, potential methodologies for budgeting, forecasting, investment income. So I think this is a relatively simple idea. Again, it's an idea for discussion. The idea would be that, broadly speaking, we have two investment pools. We have an operating fund investment pool, which includes designated funds. And we have the MR&R investment pool, which is intended for infrastructure. Okay. So Dale and staff need to and do provide forecasts for future investment income. So Dale, why don't you explain briefly how you do that?
Well, a little bit of perspective on history. When I first arrived, the first couple of years, I applied an interest rate to cash flow, and did a monthly cash flow with earnings and so forth and so on, primarily on the operating account, because that has the highest influx of cash throughout the year. Obviously, mostly weighted towards the front because of assessments. And I veered away from that this last year because that was a lot of work to produce something that
Could be anything.
didn't really, to a certain extent, you assess your performance against budget, and that just wasn't very accurate because of all kinds of reasons. But so I veered away from it, and we just did a historical, okay, if we did this much this year, let's look at the amounts, don't really change as far as balances. Let's do something similar, but increase it by 100,000 because we missed it last year, what have you, right? So it was more of a dart on the wall, so to speak. And then as it pertains to a certain extent with the reserve fund, it's similar. We've got certain balances, and some of that is difficult because much of it is in equity, so it can be unrealized, realized, and we don't budget for unrealized. So again, I'm open to thoughts, but I would also say that regardless if we add a significant amount of structure to it, it's still just an estimate that may or may not be accurate.
Right. Okay, that's helpful. So here's the discussion point. Is there a better way, accepting Dale's observation that it's a little bit of a guess and we don't want to exhaust a lot of staff time on guessing? Is there a better way? And what I had in mind was a simple model that we might choose to use. So for example, for operating account funds, we might pick a 12-month treasury yield or 5-year rolling average of a year or 2-year rolling average. Something that was market-based, and do the same for the MR&R reserve, but obviously we're not and rather than doing, say, a 18 or 24-month sort of rolling yield, maybe a 10-year treasury yield, just as a fact-based approach, as opposed to, well, we did this last year and let's bump that up by 100,000 for this year. I'm just wondering whether it might be better and possibly more accurate just to take a proxy market index for doing the forecast for both pools. So that's my idea.
So from I'm doing a budget right now for my company. So, and I think we've all probably done this in our lives. I typically only spend time thinking about budgeting things that are actually, controllable or that matter, even if they're not controllable. And so, because if I make knock-on derivative decisions, like in cash is, how much cash I'm gonna have is obviously something that matters. But is this a big, I'm just trying to remember back to the budget, is this a big number for us? And,
Yeah.
In our operating cash, on the MR&R side, it is what it is, right? Cash doesn't really, but.
Accumulates.
Right, so I think about this as an operating matter, the interest in our operating account. For example, if we missed it by a lot, we would then have, and we run a deficit, then potentially we would have undercharged the membership for assessments, I guess is how I was thinking about this. So like, what is the number?
If we missed by, in theory, we could miss by $100,000 or $200,000. I don't remember off the top of my head what our earnings for the year was. I could probably find out real quick.
It's a couple $1 million, right? Combined.
Yeah, well, we've got
But the MR&R, you don't need.
MR&R, we've got $20+ million.
Right, so really it's
But
an
that, we're not
operating.
relying on that in the operating.
No, not at all.
No, but it is in the MR&R budget. There is a forecast of earnings.
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
But it doesn't matter if you're wrong.
It has a much lesser impact on, it basically just changes the metrics with regard to
Because
percent funded, and even at that point,
MR&R based on.
even at that point in
Right?
the
That's-
reserve
that's-
fund, if you're
right.
off 100,000, it really doesn't impact.
So the place that matters is the operating, because we gotta spend that cash this year. And if adding a lot of specificity to a budget process, I think what you propose makes sense to me, that you would use, a metric that closely approximate how you earn interest on it. And use,
So you like my idea?
I do like your.
Okay.
For the operating side.
But
So applying it to the cash flow and, I did it
Okay.
the first couple of years. It's just a matter of saying.
I'm not suggesting it's a debate. And David, to a point that you made earlier, transparency is important. And I'm not saying that what we're doing now is bad or wrong. That is not the point. The point is, if the members say, well, how in the heck where did this number come from? Well, we have something that is factual. It may be right, it may be wrong, but we have something that's factual that we can say, this is how we came up with these numbers. It wasn't just, oh, by the way, that was last year plus another number. It was fact-based.
So investment earnings for, this year forecasted about 400,000.
For the operating account.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how about for the reserve?
750.
In total.
Forecasting 700 and some thousand.
718,000.
And so if you're wrong by 10, 20%,
I'm not fussed.
I would put that in the doesn't matter category.
For the reserve, or both.
Again, the reserve is not, we don't manage the reserve based
Same.
on the.
I agree.
We manage the reserve, the MRR based on the percent.
But as a control, we should have a good decent forecast in the reserve as well. I mean, I just suggest 1% of equity, 4% of fixed income, something like that. We don't forecast any gains in.
Okay, so here's a simple, top of mind and probably crazy example. So the MR&R is 25 million, 30 million?
Yeah.
Let's say 30, just to make the math easy. The long-term treasury is 5%, the 10-year treasury is 5% plus or minus.
4.11.
The budget is $1.5 million.
That's fine, yeah. I agree.
But it's not, but there's some, and again, we're able to articulate, well, where did that number come from? I think that feels better to me than, well, that's what we had last year.
Give me a rate and I'll apply it.
Okay.
It's as easy as that. I
Okay.
can do whatever.
Well, you know the yield you got this year. Are rates going up or down next year? Take a view on what that.
Well, the rates themselves are already at forecast.
Right, so. Yeah.
Okay, all right. So
2-year, 10-year?
I would
Seems
just,
like an improvement, so.
yeah, okay. So Dale, could we, as a follow-up, could we ask you to sort of noodle on that and come back with your own thoughts on how we might do this? Okay. Item number 4, unrealized gains and losses. We do not budget. We do not report in our quarterly reports unrealized gains or losses. Is that right? In our quarterly financial report.
We have at times, but recently not. Originally, I reported them by showing our cash statement with the reconciliation to GAAP at the bottom. Just this last quarter, I did not do that because just so much information, and I felt like that reconciliation, as long as I acknowledged that we do that, that may be confusing to the membership. Now, I mean, it's easy to disclose unrealized gains at any given point. So what my thought would be to not have that reconciliation gap, but disclose on a quarterly basis what those unrealized gains are.
Good. Here's just a thought, again, for us to chew on, accept, reject, whatever. The concept of an unrealized gain. Let's say we have $1 million of equity in the MR&R. And we have $100,000 of unrealized gains. But those unrealized gains don't run through our regular quarterly financials because it's deemed not to be a cash item. Correct? Where I'm struggling is we report the $1 million as realized, but we don't report the 100,000 as realized. And to me, there's no difference. The the realization of the $1 million is no better or worse than the $1 million of incremental value that we've created. That could be zero or it could be doubled. We don't know. And so I'm just positing whether the concept as it relates to investment securities, whether the concept of realized and unrealized is helpful.
So,
But don't we like show just what the market value of our portfolio is? Like ultimately, realized and unrealized would matter if you're like a taxable obligor or not. But in this case, we're not taxable, right? So why would it matter? Like we don't have a tax
Absolutely right, Fran. That's my point.
so to clarify, the balance sheet always shows unrealized. Okay, so at any given point, the balance sheet, which we report on quarterly, that include the investment line item includes unrealized gains. So the value of the portfolio is in the balance sheet. And if we disclose
market value.
right,
Yeah.
so if we disclose the unrealized as it pertains to the income statement or the cash statement, then that brings us full circle to say that balance sheet shows exactly what our assets are, including market. And then as far as an income statement, the activities that are producing that balance sheet, it's on a cash basis. And oh, by the way, unrealized gains and losses are X.
Yeah, perfect. Except for one important item. The funded level of our reserve.
I don't have any issue with, so originally, again, before we started doing the cash statement and we were doing it according to GAAP, then we were reporting the percent of deterioration funded, including unrealized gains. When we went to cash, I switched that because of the concept of the cash, okay? So based on the concepts that we've talked about, Paul, and I've talked with Kevin about, it's very easy to change that metric to include,
Okay,
again.
so,
Would it be
you made,
unrealized gains and
you improved my,
Sure, whatever,
improved my life.
whether they're gains or losses,
Right.
unrealized would be included in that.
Because I want the members to see when and I think the funded level is a very, very important metric, very important metric. And the reality is, we don't know what the real estate market is going to do. And the reality is, we don't know what the equity market is going to do or the debt market is going to do. So unrealized gains or losses should be included in the metric that we give our members to tell them your asset replacement reserve is funded at this moment in time at X.
So my hesitation in doing that
Yeah.
again was basically that we don't know where that's going to be realized or not.
Wow.
But if we had a catastrophe, if the world stopped tomorrow, we would sell off all of our assets and we would realize what that is. So that kind of gave me comfort in saying, you know what, let's go ahead and report that.
And we do have to report market in the 990,
Yeah.
tax disclosure.
Yeah, a lot of people read that.
I do actually. I find it fascinating. It's very informative.
Somebody at the IRS and you.
All right, so I think
Actually,
we're
no one
done
knows.
here on that issue.
I'm good.
Okay, great. That's very helpful feedback. So on the first bullet point, we have volunteers. There is a little bit of follow-up on the reserve, bullet point number 2. On number 3, we're in agreement and Dale is going to come up with the right market proxies. And number 4, we have solved. And
Can I ask, you brought up a question earlier about whether the association was prepared and could borrow. And that seems like something that we might want to explore so that we weren't doing it in the moment. because sometimes there's corporate organization and some stuff you have to do to get yourself ready. So if that's something that might be a body of work to actually just go look at with our attorneys to figure out exactly how we would execute if you ever needed to borrow it, or that was thought to be a.
Completely agree.
So-
That's part of the
Okay.
B part of that bullet.
And we did borrow in the past. We borrowed for the purchase of this building specifically. I don't remember all of the stuff around the borrowing. We'd have to go back and look it up, but we did borrow for this building.
I think, and Dale will correct me because I'm probably wrong, but I think the only specific borrowing that is specifically referenced in our documents is the short-term line of credit for storm-related expenditures. Is that right?
That's our current.
But I agree with you, Dave. I think sort of knowing, here's the box that we can operate within would be very helpful. Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate.
Paul, you have,
Yeah.
a member online, Jim Jurassic.
Yeah. Okay. So the next part of our agenda is member comments.
Oh, perfect timing. Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Good. I'm just gonna limit my comments today to talk about the investment strategy issue, the discussion, and just want to compliment the committee on I think noodling these issues around extremely well and hitting the major points. Totally support the idea of benchmarking with other HOAs. I think you're going to find that there are other HOAs that do not invest in equities. That's not a universal thing and not something I would agree with. I think you do need some level of equity investment, but my instinct is similar to Paul's, that our level of equity is too much. And I think just two specific comments with respect to that. One, I think, I would suggest you ask Morgan Stanley to do an analysis of what the smallest equity allocation would be to allow a reasonable likelihood, as Paul said, 90%, a 90% chance that you will have the funds that are needed when they're needed in the reserve fund. And I just think I don't know if they've been asked that specific question. I think they've been asked, well, is the allocation we have now appropriate? The second thing is it's not exactly like a pension fund, because 40 to 45% of the funds that go into the reserve fund are coming from the transfer fees. And I think everybody would agree that the transfer fees are correlated to economic conditions, which are in turn correlated to likely the stock market performance. And I think that's a major difference between how pension funds are funded and how homeowners associations are funded. So I strongly suggest that you consider that when you're formulating this policy and trying to determine what the appropriate level of equity allocation is. So I'll leave it for that today, but thank you for a very interesting meeting and great discussion.
Jim, I would thank you for your comments, number one. Number two, I think your point about the pension fund analogy is correct, because especially in large pension funds, and of course I'm not an expert, but you have thousands of lives, and the payout obligation of the liabilities, the future liabilities of a pension fund, I would guess, underline guess, are much more predictable than the expenditure profile for our MR&R.
There's no doubt there are actuarial models, so that are very accurate with that. I don't think we have that for.
Have lives, I think that's probably more predictable than a pension. So I don't know that I would agree with that statement.
Okay.
Yeah, the other thing when we're talking about this is the reason we reference pensions is because I think it's important to differentiate the liabilities here. And in many ways, our liabilities are similar to a pension in terms of the long dated nature of them. So I think, we can all agree that short dated instruments, investment instruments are reasonable for operating cash needs and short dated needs. But once we go out further, it becomes more challenging to say, okay, we're going to change our allocation every single period. I mean, when you start looking at the longer dated, analysis that's been done on this type of longer dated liability, and that's why we reference pensions more to kind of underline these are longer dated liabilities. Dale can give you exactly kind of, I think last time we talked about this, Dale, it was about 10 years. So these are longer dated liabilities that require like a different asset allocation than you would if you had shorter dated liabilities. And quite frankly, I mean, we're nowhere near where you can look it up online. I mean, we're nowhere near where like this typical pension fund would necessarily allocate. So, and I mean, they're much more aggressive. They're in alternatives and et cetera, which we're clearly never gonna we're clearly never gonna go into. And we should, in my opinion, we should never go into. But I mean, nonetheless, I think it's more about liabilities rather than like the funding source is obviously different, but the liability stream is not that different. The way to think about it is it's a long-term liability. And so,
Don't disagree. I don't
it
disagree with any of
requires
that.
different aspects.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that. It's just that doesn't get you, I mean, in principle, you're correct. But in terms of practice and Keita's specific situation, I think there needs to be some additional thought on what that right equity number is. All I can say is by instinct, I don't think the right questions have been asked to say, what is the least amount of equity allocation that we can have? Not that you might not go above that, but that will get us to that objective. I don't know if that question's been asked.
Yeah.
So just for clarification for the group, I've had several conversations in this regard with them, and specific to, well, I know the question is going to be raised with regard to where we need to be. And the answer continues to be, they're comfortable with our allocation because at some point they're outpacing inflation slightly, right? That's what the reports have been, but they feel they're comfortable with that because of the volatility of the market. There's a little bit of cushion in case the market does change to the negative, and they can still meet the target of inflation. So slightly outpacing inflation is a good thing in their eye because they do have a little cushion to continue to meet our objective.
What about the downside?
Yeah.
What about the downside though?
Well, can I just make a comment? I was a trustee of a large pension fund. We use caps and collars to protect against risk on equities. I mean, have we considered that?
No, please, no derivatives, please.
It's, well.
I think the thing here is,
Okay,
yeah.
I think this has been a constructive, this issue will be, perennial. It's never going to go away. Not everyone is always going to agree, but I think it's been a worthwhile discussion. So do we have any other member comments, Ellen?
No.
Okay. Any other comments from my colleagues on the committee or from staff? Hearing none. Thank you very much. I thought this was a very constructive and interesting use of time. I move for adjournment. Is there a motion?
Motion.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Thanks, everyone.
Aye.
Thanks,
Bye.
Brian.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you. Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Take care.